Isn't the music?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for watching the DMZ America podcast, or for listening if you can't watch, or you don't want to watch, or you just don't want to see our faces. It's Saturday, April 19th, 2025. Coming to you from the left, I am editorial cartoonist Ted Rall.
And I'm coming to you from the right. I'm editorial cartoonist Scott Stantis.
And so, Scott, you and I, today's topic is basically the state of editorial cartooning, and probably something that comes as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people. I'm sure you get this. People walk up to me and they say, "Oh, political cartoonist, you must have so much to draw about. You have so much material." That's not untrue. Donald Trump is providing us with a fire hose of material news stories. We could, if we had the time and the AI, we could probably each draw 12 cartoons a day, no problem. The ideas are not lacking, but we are also both very down. There's the fact that there's been a downward trend in the profession in a number of respects, and we should get into that over the course of many years. I mean, the idea that this was a dying profession is something that's been in news articles going back to the 1980s. And now
Ted, real quick, if I could jump in, a little history note. The American Association of Editorial Cartoonists was started in 1959, and it was triggered by an article, is editorial cartooning dead? This was 1959, the year I was born. Which
right. Okay.
Those of you playing at home is almost 66 years ago.
It is also true that newspaper circulation in the United States peaked out in 1960, which is an interesting fact. And it's slowly declined, but then the drop off became precipitous, of course, after the mid 90s. Something happened. I don't remember what it was, something technological. And anyway,
well, we should have just ignored it. Oh, wait, we did.
Okay. Yeah, well, you and I didn't, but like the powers that be did. And anyway, here we are. And I think, I've been thinking, you've been very down on the profession, on the state of the profession professionally for a while, and so have I. And I've been thinking that in terms of Donald Trump, I don't. So we should get into all the structural issues that are going on in the profession, and the effect not just political cartooning, but cartooning writ large, which you're also a part of as a comic strip creator of Prickly City, but also journalism in general, and basically anything involving creativity is highly disrupted, including radio, photography, fine arts, you name it. I just put out my new book that's disrupted. By the way, here it is. Hey, everybody!
Yay!
You can't order it yet, but you can order it.
Read Ted's book.
May 1st.
Ted's book.
May 1st, Socialist Workers' Day.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
It's coming out on May 1st.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Arise, ye children of starvation. Arise, ye wretched of the earth.
So we'll get into that.
International.
Everyone's wondering like what it looks like. It's like, so there are cartoons, but it's mostly text, right? It's like that.
Oh, you caved into the text people. Ted.
Yeah, so I gave a big text, big word. So anyway, this is where we are. And for me, I found personally as a creative person, setting the remuneration issue aside temporarily, it's not that interesting to say that fascism is bad. It's actually really boring. And if you look at, for example, collections of political cartoons from the 1930s and 1940s, the anti-Hitler ones are really not great cartoons because there's no sophistication to them. I personally found the work that I did, I got completely, shit upon for doing it, but criticizing Obama from the left was much more challenging for me, much more rewarding personally as a creative person. and I enjoyed it more. I didn't really particularly enjoy drawing under George W. Bush, even though I think I was pretty good at it.
Oh, you're very good.
But I didn't like it.
Busho?
So being good at something,
Brilliant.
I could be really good at working the glory hole, but it doesn't mean that I would want that job. So, so yeah, you know how like in our generation, if your parents said like, oh well, the school says you tested great in sorting tobacco leaves by size and color. You then say, well, I guess I'm going to be sorting tobacco leaves by size and color. And it's like, now like, no, follow your bliss. I believe in that.
Well, probably more so, but that's another podcast altogether. The Gen Z employment issue is popping up all over the place, and many people are writing about it. But that's another podcast for another time. Yeah. Ted, I've mentioned this before in other podcasts and in private conversations, public discussions, and so on. I always felt that we as cartoonists, editorial cartoonists, had targets on our backs. Editors always resented us. So let's begin with that. There's always been this level of antagonism that we've had to wrestle with, and demeanment. Is that a word? Or diminishment? That's it. That's what I was looking for.
No wonder, and I don't know why they don't take it seriously.
And they never did. Up to and including the last year or so of my tenure as the full-time cartoonist at the Chicago Tribune, I would have the writers, the old writers, say, "What are you going to do? Write a cartoon about it?" That's a quote, and it's like, yeah, which people might actually, read versus the bullshit you spew out and the thumb-sucking crap that editors seem to love. You look at editorial pages today, Ted. I look at a lot because, well, I'm that guy, and I tend to. Your old newspaper, or the one of your old newspapers, the Dayton Daily News. They don't. I'd say probably at least 50% of the time, if not more, they do not run an editorial cartoon on the editorial page. They run a picture of a waffle or a picture of, here's a building we're talking about. Stuff that really grabs the readers. There's been an antagonism. I just saw your cat's tail go across the screen.
Yes, you did.
So if you get cut off from this, I'll try to carry on until Clovis hits the button.
Clovis, be gone. Okay.
But let me ask you, Ted, you've been a freelancer. You're a very successful one, I might add, freelancer your entire career. Have you ever experienced that level of antagonism that I've told you about and that I've mentioned 1,000,001 times? Have you ever faced it, that you just had editors who they ran your work, but they ran it with, if not literal, at least an implied, just as, shit, I guess idiots like this.
Right. I honestly, I think it happened to me, a tiny fraction of the people like you who worked on staff in newsrooms at daily newspapers. As a freelancer, if they're running my work, it's because they like cartoons. And as someone whose work was stylistically and politically unusual, I would say, in the marketplace, you take a certain level of commitment to the form to be willing to take the heat to running a Ted Rall cartoon. So if you're that person, you're probably appreciative of the work itself. So for the most part, I didn't really get a lot of that. But certainly, look, your experience from all our colleagues that I've heard was really, really standard. It happened all the time. And, I think, I think that the point of the target on the back is, I don't boo-hoo for you guys because you all made a lot more money than I did. But
I don't know if that's true.
But that said, maybe not. But the point is that but I do think what it reflected was, as soon as there was a downturn in newspapering, and there was it was like, well, who's going to be the first to go? Who are we going to make walk the plank first? And everybody who's ever been part of a mass layoff knows they don't fire the bad workers. They fire the people that the boss doesn't particularly like that much. Yeah. And so the cartoonist often ended up being that person. Maybe they liked them personally, but they definitely had issues with like fighting off. I always tell the story about going for an interview at the Asbury Park Press in New Jersey. This executive editor, whose name was Ray Olworther, because I'm naming names here. Ray had me come into his office, the tail. And so everything went really well. I was doing freelance cartoons for them for a year. And, he was like, we like your work. We were ready to move forward. And there was just like that. There's just one question. And it was like 5:30 in the afternoon. And most people had already left for the day. And he points out the window to the suburban parking lot where the paper was. And he says, am I ever going to look out that window and see people protesting a cartoon that you drew? And I was like, sir, I have no idea. I mean, I was like, when I draw a cartoon, I don't set out to make people angry, but I also don't, it's not part of my consideration. I just draw the cartoon that I have an idea for and that I think is the best idea. Sometimes people get angry. Mostly they don't, but sometimes they do. And I mean, it is politics. People get agitated. And I knew at that moment I had completely blown the interview. But I mean,
well, what are you supposed to say? Oh no, my work is going to be the pablum.
No one will ever protest one of my cartoons.
No one will care ever about what I draw.
How can I guarantee that? I could draw the flattest, lamest pablum in the world and still get protests, right? I mean,
I think most of us would have responded, well, I would hope so.
And I didn't even do that. I was just
I know that's so it's remarkable restraint on your part. And I don't want to belabor this point because there are many, many others to be made. But there's two instances I want to share with you. One is I was on a panel with Burke Breathed and Stephan Pastis and legendary syndicate executive Lee Salem at the Features Editors Conference in New Orleans. This was many years ago. I mean, this had to have been 20 years ago. And I'll never forget this, Ted, maybe 15 years ago. I'll never forget this. It seemed the number one concern for these editors of a newspaper consumed by, consumers and readers. The one thing that they seemed to dread more than anything else was that they would get a call concerning a feature in their pages and that they would have to deal with that call. And all four of us on the panel were aghast. And this seemed to be met with unanimous consent by this audience of feature editors. And we were and to his credit, Burke Breathed is like, no, don't you understand that means people care?
Yes.
They have some ownership and some real love and affection for your product. And they're expressing that this is a good thing. And they go, no, it's not. It's like, oh, good God. At that point, I knew we were in serious trouble. And the second thing is, and you're naming names, I'll name names. When I was at the Birmingham News, God bless them, instead of just doing the reader polls, which are bullshit, they're unscientific and they can be ginned. And I knew the guys who do Baby Blues totally had a system where they would, cram the ballot box in favor of their feature. They were masters at it. Jerry Scott and I can't remember the other guy's name. Anyway, the Birmingham News decided to have a focus group and try and have a real scientific approach to what people were and were not reading. One morning was dedicated to the editorial page. Okay, stay with me on this. So they asked the group, what do you read the editorial page on a daily basis? 9 out of 10 of them said yes. It says, what do you read? And they said, well, we love the editorial cartoon. And the questions are going, so what else do you read on it? Because, oh no, we just read the editorial cartoon. And they kept, Ted, this is an absolutely true story. They kept pushing him saying, what else do you read about? What else do you like about the editorial page? He says, we don't know. We don't read it. We like the editorial cartoon.
We only read the editorial.
We only read the editorial cartoon. And they kept pushing them. So what about the letters? We don't read those. What about the columns?
You can imagine an editor who might say, maybe we should only have like 15 editorial cartoons there. Instead.
Well, you would think that would be the smart approach this was at the time a $1 billion business. Now it's literally tens of dollars worth of business. Ted, the next day they got so frustrated they blacked out my cartoon.
That's awesome.
And then asked, "What do you read?" And it's just like, well, That's what we're facing. So
Well,
editors
that's the
are,
beginning of what we're facing, right?
yes,
So like
that was the fight forever from the
you're
moment I
working,
started.
yeah. These fights go back to, when I think about like, Winsor McCay, who drew the legendary golden age of comics, comic strip, Little Nemo in
Little,
Slumberland, and a few other features, right? But he had a champion in William Randolph Hearst. Basically, the editors didn't really particularly want to run this stuff. Cartooning has always kind of required like champions. Like you needed to cultivate like a mole in the organization who was going to support you, and go to bat for you. And obviously, it's gotten worse. Those moles have become really impossible to find. And then, we've had, I think also kind of like the pussification of political cartooning. When I got into
I was
it,
about to touch on that.
it's like look, this was a format. I always thought of it as punk rock, right? Like this is like,
you're not wrong.
anyone can do it. You don't need to go to a special school. In fact, people who do tend to not be successful at it. Most people are almost everyone's self-taught. They didn't go to art school. It's basically like, it's obnoxious, it's loud, it's unfair, it's punk rock, and it's mean, and it's aggressive.
Yes.
And starting, he's a friend of mine. I consider him a mentor. But starting with Mike Peters in the 1970s and early 1980s, when he introduced, he's kind of like, like the Dada movement. Like the Dada movement was a criticism of the arts at the time, and unfortunately ended up being something that like modern art copied instead of understanding that it was a critique. Mike Peters wasn't a critique, but he was taking cartooning in like sort of a side direction of like using references to like Disney movies and fairy tales and stuff like that to make political points. And he was quite droll. He himself did good work, but the people who were influenced by him and people like him did really bad work. And so basically over the years, there was the sense that political cartooning became less serious. More, it was looking for the cheap gag, looking for the joke. There were certain formulas that you and I both recognized, like taking two stories out of the news and mashing them up, even if they weren't related and didn't have anything much in common at all. Tying something into, or even like really cheaply doing cartoons about stuff that's not really political. Like I remember when Windows 97 was released, there were political cartoons about Windows 97 being released. And it was like, there was nothing political about Windows 97. And it was just like, so, and basically, I think that, and I get why, our colleagues chased that kind of work, because that's the kind of work that started getting people jobs at papers. It started getting people raises. It started getting people prizes like the Pulitzers and other ones. And so that's what got rewarded. And people who were doing more aggressive work for a time, like we found a home in the alt weeklies, like the Village Voice and LA Weekly and stuff like San Francisco Bay Guardian. But that was a short ride, right? It basically ran from the 90s until I would say maybe 15 years ago, it completely died. And so, that went away. And then there was also the economics of syndication, where, the typical cartoonist, when you and I started, the model was you got a job at a paper. They paid you, I don't know, $60,000 a year. You got you or more or less, depending. You got full benefits. You worked on staff at a job, and then if you were lucky, and you were picked up for national syndication, you'd pick up a few $100 a month, maybe even 1,000 or more, maybe more, depending on how many papers you had and how big those papers were. And they would, or whether you were in a package or whether you were syndicated by individually. But the point is that was considered, we called it in the profession beer money. Like that was the extra money. And then, so after a while, some newspapers are like, well, I can fire Scott Stantis and save my, X number of, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And I can get like 50, editorial cartoons every day through syndication for a fraction of what I paid Scott. So, why am I paying Scott? Well, the problem is that if everybody does that, then no one's paying Scott
Right.
anymore. And then so then there's no one to feed the syndicate thing. So people stop. Eventually they drop out of syndication, and so that goes away, right? So it's just basically the profession cannibalized itself. And then let's name names. There were bottom feeders who tried to undermine the syndication model, which was already pennies on the dollar. But then it was like Daryl Cagle created his own syndicate called Cagle Cartoons. It's still
Clever.
around.
I wonder if there's a focus group for that.
And he packages all these cartoons, and he pays pennies on the dollar to these people who are in his stable. I mean, they do get exposure. Some of them can be in many, many newspapers, or at least they're seen by the editors of many, many newspapers.
Yes.
They have the possibility of appearing in many newspapers, even though they probably don't. And so, it's like, well, the joke in the profession is like, you die of exposure. And that's basically kind of like, so he undermined the syndicate model that I relied on for years. Just I'm individually syndicated, you're individually syndicated. Frankly, the better cartoonists tend to be individually syndicated. And so it's just been a death spiral. Now, obviously, print in general has been in trouble for a long time. So,
right.
But we were the canary in the coal mine here. We were
right.
among the first to be chopped. And so now, I'm young for this profession. I mean, I'm 61 years old. I'm one of the younger ones, right? I mean, how many are there that are younger than me? 5? I mean,
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So
maybe. Let me jump in because there's a lot to unpack there very quickly. But first and foremost, an area where I was mentored by Paul Conrad, the 3-time Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist for the Los Angeles Times. And Paul Conrad was aghast at what was happening with Mike Peters and Jeff McNelly. Jeff McNelly, I think, can be underrated as just sort of like light and airy because he was, but he was also extremely subversive. And I think the people who copied him, the phrase McNelly clone was thrown around our profession for decades because everyone wanted to draw like him because he was a magnificent artist.
Yeah, he was. For people who are unfamiliar, if you saw, he was the creator of Shoe, but imagine on a much higher level, big, beautiful, highly cross-hatched renditions of, like, say, aircraft carriers or whatever, and you're just like,
yeah,
holy crap, how did he do that?
Yeah, just beautiful work. But the thing is, you mentioned Mike Peters, and Mike is a lovely person. He's still with us, still cartooning. But it always made me cringe when I saw him. He had a weekly gig on the Today Show when that really mattered. Yeah. And he'd show up and he would just do the golly, I'm just a goofball. Gee whiz, look, I'm dressed like Superman. And if you're trying to be serious, if you're trying to be a serious commentator, and your editors see this, they know, I mean, they project that that's what cartoonists are. And there are other cartoonists who mimicked that. And, the work suffered and jobs suffered because editors didn't take us seriously. We were the joke. We were the comic relief. I mean, how many times, Ted, had you been invited to be on a panel? Maybe you less than than probably staff cartoonists, because staff cartoonists, many of whom followed that mold. And they said, now for a little comic relief, here's Scott Stantis, editor. He's a cartoonist.
I can't how many times, I don't know, like, how many times you guys got invited to be on panels, but I did get invited. I felt like a lot. And yeah, that's always how it was. I mean, you would literally, sometimes it did look, it was an easy appearance, right? Because it's sort of like when you go to a comedy club, you've paid your cover charge, you've agreed to buy 2 drink minimum. You might even get some food. So you're in the mood to laugh. And unless that comedian really sucks, you're probably going to laugh. And like, it's just like, it's psychology. One time I spoke to a group of editors in Chicago, and it was a morning meeting, and my flight was late, and I arrived and traffic was heavy. So I arrived and I started my speech maybe 20 minutes late. I come on, I apologized for my tardiness and explained a little bit of what happened. people are cracking up laughing. I wasn't saying anything funny. It was just like, I was just like totally playing it straight. But it was like, I could have read the menu and they would have been like cracking up, right? So it's like, look, here be a comedian, it's like, so, and I think we are. I mean, here's the thing, political cartooning is funny because it's political, so it's serious. But cartooning is like literally something that a kid can do. And so therefore it's meant to be childish. And there are those of us in the profession who really go with that court jester kind of vibe. And I think it drags us down.
It clearly it did. And what it leads to, and you touched on this subject, is just, you would think that with a profession in crisis, people would really stretch, or you and I would think, let me put it that way, that you would you would reach for something bigger, better, try to make it more exceptional. But in fact, what happened was mediocrity, because you talk about syndication, and editors wanted to get cartoonists who, to your point, Ted, didn't bring protesters into his parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, many cartoonists, and I'm going to be the first, I'm going to admit I was one of them in many instances. There were days when I just wanted my cartoon to be reprinted in Newsweek, and I knew what the secret sauce was. The secret sauce was, don't say anything big, don't say anything important, make a joke about the Ayatollah, and you're going to get reprinted. And so and every Saturday I'd run to the Barnes and Noble. That's a bookstore, kids, for those of you, unawares, and newspapers, ink on paper. Again, for those of you unaware, and I'd run to the newsstand and I'd look to see what newspapers reprinted my work. And that was a great motivator. It's ego. I mean, heck, back in the day, your work ran in the Washington Post. That means the president of the United States saw your cartoon.
Right.
Ambassadors, congressmen, senators, cabinet officers, they all saw your cartoon if it was in the Washington Post. That was heady stuff. The American Association of Editorial Cartoonists, when a new president came into office, we would be invited and we would bring a book of caricatures to present to that president and in the Oval Office. I mean, that's the level where we were at one time. But when you decide that your profession is a joke, when you decide that your profession is not important enough to take a strong stance. You mentioned, you mentioned Mike Peters, and I kind of jumped all over him. But I also would argue that particularly Mike's early work was incredibly hard hitting in, again, a very smart, subversive way, in a way that's almost impossible to duplicate or mimic. But God love them, every cartoonist in America tried.
Yes.
And personality-wise, they tried, and it was just, and it continues to be infuriating. I have always felt strongly that this profession can move the needle, and it has. Look at what, it takes a while. It's not easy. Herblock on Nixon hammered away at that, but really established a national persona for Richard Nixon. Jeff McNally definitely set and established and drew literally the view of and the caricature of Jimmy Carter, which resonated with the American public. It moved the needle. Editorial cartoons moved needles, particularly now, I'd say still are effective on local. I can tell you, I do work for the Chicago Tribune still, and I know that my work has some impact in Chicago. Does it have any impact nationally? No. Absolutely not. It's still nice to get reprinted. It's still nice to, see your work, places, but that's not nearly as important to me as, a paycheck first.
Right.
So,
well, and I think that's important to talk about, right? There are people, I think people will continue to draw cartoons. They'll continue to do memes, which are basically cartoons, right? What is a cartoon? It is a picture plus words. And that's what a meme is. Those will happen, but look, it's kind of like in the Middle Ages, there were freelance scientists who worked on alchemy and stuff. But like freelance science is not the same thing as like a well-funded professional lab of people who dedicate their lives and their schooling just to, a science. And in the same way, someone who spends all of their time living and breathing politics and social changes and cultural changes and tries to synthesize those into political cartoons is just on a different level from someone who is doing this as a freelancer or on the side, right? And so it's like you can tell the difference. It's like the difference between me taking a picture with my phone as opposed to a professional photographer who,
Right.
who knows what they're doing. It's all the difference in the world. And so, I mean, I guess we could say it'll probably come back in some form. You've talked about this offline with me. Like at some point, some kid is going to end up getting discovered, and then everyone's going to want to hire. That's probably true. But I don't want this to be about whinging, but I do think it's a little bit interesting that like right now, I wanted to talk about the Trump effect, right? Normally you would think that a president who generates this much heat and this much controversy and this much news would be a boon to cartooning. I don't think that's been the case at all. I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
No, not at all. We have a number of fellow cartoonists who do nothing but anti-Trump cartoons. That's every day. And frankly, that just gets boring and it gets monotonous, and it really does dilute their own effectiveness. The Trump effect, I mean, Banyan codified it in the first term. He said, we're going to throw 3 things out a day, many of them outrageous, just to keep the opposition off kilter. So you can do things like you could, I'm sorry, Kat just keeps, Clovis wants to be in on this podcast so much.
Yeah, he does. He'd be more popular than us, no doubt. Here.
And the Trump
sees his face. Know his name.
Clovis, and fear him. We talked about, and so the reaction to the Trump effect, Ted, and you touched on it. I'm going to dive in and say, and where I was going with my initial point with, you think that we try to strive for excellence or try to strive for, a harder hitting cartoons and we're not there. We actually move closer towards and aimed at mediocrity. And I would argue,
true. I mean, like I got to say, and this, I've told you this offline, so it's true.
Yes.
When I choose my cartoons, when I apply for prizes, which I apply for fewer and fewer prizes all the time because the winners are worse and worse every single year.
Yeah.
And further away from what I try to do. I'm like, well, if this is what they're rewarding, then I'm gone. But when I, typically it's 15 or 20 cartoons. You look at the year's previous work. So I go through it and I try to select the stupidest, worst cartoons of the year. Because I know from experience that even from the people who win, their stupidest work is what wins. I mean, so it's the stupidest cartoons by the stupidest cartoonists that win the most prizes. There are exceptions, of course, but generally speaking.
Yeah, I would jump in. I don't enter anything anymore, even the free ones, enter free. I mean, for those of you who don't know, for instance, the Pulitzer Prize still has an entry fee, which is insane. $75. And I mean, that's
it takes some time. It's a hinky website. You have to upload your stuff one cartoon at a time, and it's easier than it used to be, but it's still time consuming. And it's also just like, that's an hour of your life you're never going to get back. And that like, and the $75, you're certainly not going to get back. We have a colleague, Jen Sorensen, who says, she doesn't apply for the Pulitzer. And she says, every year I win a mini Pulitzer Prize of $75.
I love that.
It adds up.
And I look at the winners over the last couple decade and a half, 2 decades, and it's like to a point that the great 20th and 21st century philosopher T. Rall said, "What would you want to win an award that was won by this litany of people?" And the answer is, I wouldn't. I mean, it's been diminished now to the point where not just the Pulitzer, but many of the awards. And it's just like, why would I enter firstly, when a conservative's never going to win anymore. I mean,
there is. I mean, honestly, there's no one leftier in cartooning in America than I am, and I will verify what Scott's saying here. There's a strong, hard bias against conservatives and Republicans in general. Now, can you point to a few Republicans who've won some awards? Sure, and Scott's won one, but it's like you can tell the bias. There's no question. There's some who have been completely snubbed and have never won anything. Then there's people like Scott who won far fewer than they deserve, and then
won one
who deserve a lot, who have won more than they deserve. So
the last 20 years, I've just not. I mean, I entered times when I entered, I had to. My editor said, you're entering. Okay.
If they want to do the work for you and waste $75.
Yeah, I guess. But Ron Swanson, the character from Parks and Rec, has a great line. He says, "Awards are stupid," and they are stupid. I mean, what? But there was this
awards because they turn everybody except one person, or maybe two, if there's a runner-up, into losers. So I mean, just think about like how everything is so incremental in our society, right? I mean. It's really, you could say this about sports too. I always think it's insane. Look at the Olympics. Someone comes in 1/100th of a second before someone else, and then that person is on the Wheaties box. But the person who came, this number 2, they're a loser. They're that person who can run a 3-minute, 42-second mile. That person's, basically they get as much reward as I do for sitting here talking to you after having stuffed my face with English muffins this morning. It's ridiculous.
Well, and that's the, and so there are going to be many of our colleagues watching this. Well, they're just bitter because they never won. Blah, blah, blah. And I am stating for the record.
I've won plenty. I'm a Pulitzer finalist, 2 RFK Journalism Awards, several AAN awards. I can go on.
But I'm going to say I have an even better record, Ted. I don't fucking enter.
Right.
I just don't enter.
I don't enter anymore either. I gave up on the Pulitzers because they collapsed our category into
now especially.
So we literally, there's one category now that encompasses not only the 12 of us who still do political cartooning, but also New Yorker cartoons, gag illustrations, graphic novels, comics, caricatures. Anybody who puts a pen to paper on an iPad or on paper is all in the same category. So your odds were always long, but now it's like the lotto. It's just not worth it. So there's no point.
Jump in and add comic strips to the mix here real quick. As Ted mentioned, I do Prickly City comic strip, and this is because I am hurt by this. I am financially and professionally hurt by many newspaper chains, Gannett being one of them. I think McClatchy being another. My old chain I worked with when I was at the Birmingham News, Newhouse News Service. Newhouse newspapers or advanced publications. They've all come out with a single page of cartoons, of comic strips that were run in all of their newspapers. And Ted and I go through the list, and you just keep looking at what they pick, and you just go, okay, this guy's dead. This guy's dead, dead. You
should explain what you mean by that, by dead.
Literally dead. Literally the comic strip, the cartoonist who created, let's say, Blondie, Chick Young, died. Jesus, it must be 80 years ago, and they still keep the crappy strip going.
Because especially King Features is one of the big syndicates. Yes. In particular, they own the rights to a lot of these old legacy comic strips, and then they hire new cartoonists to keep doing them, like Pop.
And by example, let's say Little Orphan Annie, which I think is still around, but also Dick Tracy. Reading Dick Tracy by Chester Gould I was unaware because I was used to it as you were, Ted. We saw it in our papers as we grew up, but then they'd already had a new generation of writers. Chester Gould had died. Mm-hmm. You read the comic strips, the Dick Tracy's drawn and written by Chester Gould, and Holy Mary, Mother of God, they are phenomenal. You can understand why it was in every paper in the world, and he was a multi-bazillionaire because it was so clever, so compelling, so interesting. But that's the creator. Shoe continues to be produced. Jeff McNally's comic strip, and it's garbage. It's just these really.
Shoe was such a piece of Jeff McNally's personality. You know, you knew him, I knew him. And yeah, it's you can't do shit. It's like, could you draw? I mean, Prickly City can't exist without a Scott Stantis. Like, it just can't.
I think that's probably true. And so the cartoons they're picking, like I said, by dead guys. So it's Blondie, Hi and Lois. I mean, Hi, that's his name, is Hi, the husband's name. And he wears, like, you know, he wears a snap brim fedora to work still. It's just like, holy shit, who wears a goddamn...
I saw him speak one time at a National Cartoonist Society Mort Walker meeting, and he said that his big breakthrough was learning to draw round, because people don't like angular and spiky art. They like round art.
Yeah,
and
well, he's not wrong.
He's not wrong, and he did become a multimillionaire.
Yes.
But I, you know, I was kind of like thinking, oh, I'm fucked.
Yeah. So the comics page they're picking like Baby Blues, which was, you know, in competition. I did a comic strip called The Buckets, which was really looking at the ennui of being a parent. They did Baby Blues, which was, oh gosh, those darn kids and they're crazy. My gosh, and we're not sleeping. Ha! And they win. They won that, you know, in terms of
The Buckets is fondly remembered from in the syndication world among those who know. You know what I mean? Those who know. And like,
yeah, well, and I pitched it, and it was 10 years before Married with Children, or 5 years before Married with Children came out, and then shows like that, Malcolm in the Middle, and other shows that were very similar to what I was trying to do in The Buckets. But my point is that the mediocrity. I mean, look at Zits, which should be a seminal comic strip. It should be, instead of just making money and filling up a hole in a newspaper, it should have addressed the issues that the teenagers faced, and it never took, and it did in a very, oh, those darn kids and their rock music, I swear.
Right.
Turn that rap down.
All the time, and they're so lazy, and their rooms are so messy.
And they smell. Oh my gosh, the smell.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought, okay, that's part of what the strip could have been, but they could have gone off on what kids are facing. And I thought they so missed an opportunity there. And so my point is, those two strips are included in the standard comics page for Gannett newspapers, Advanced Publications, McClatchy. Those are the comic strips they picked. Hager the Horrible. Dick Brown was hilarious. He was a character. He was this long-haired, beard down to the middle of his chest, schlump of a guy who was friggin' hilarious. And his strip was funny. And then he died, and his sons and some other assistants take it over. And it's exactly as I described. It takes up a space in a newspaper, and nobody gets upset.
Right. Well, but we're kind of beyond like the whole, I mean, you know, I think the problem is, I mean, I guess now it's chicken and egg, right? So newspapers encouraged mediocrity, not just in their editorial comics, but or you know, daily comics, but also really in the prose, in the reporting, in everything. And they've blandified their product. They think that they're keeping their audience as long as possible. I would argue what they're doing is making sure that they never grow a new audience among younger people. They have certainly failed to figure out the internet for the most part, with the exception of a few products like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, but very few have figured it out. And so, you know, so that model, which supported you know, professional cartooning financially, is gone. And so, like, at this point, cartooning is really kind of like teaching or the priesthood. You kind of take a vow of poverty. You do it. You do it for the love of it, or you don't do it at all. And I think you're certainly not doing it for the big bucks, the way that people did, you know, 70, 80 years ago, when you really could make a lot of money doing this. But I don't know that there's a lot of joy in it. I mean, I have to admit, you and I talked about how we're having more fun working on projects that are not overtly political. Like, we'll always be political people, but politics is less rewarding, and political commentary is less rewarding. You do an editorial cartoon, first of all, there's not really a sense that anybody's read it. You know, it's throttled on social media. Facebook in particular doesn't let anybody see it. And so you get very few likes, you get very few comments. You don't get letters to the editor anymore. You don't hear back about them. They don't really generate a lot of controversy anymore because nobody sees them. So, like, what is the point of this? And not to mention, okay, if we're going to get into fascism is bad, well, apparently half the country doesn't really think so. So it's like, and the other half, they think that if they protest on a sunny Saturday every now and then go home at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's they've resisted. I mean, are we just old and tired, or are we tired for good reason?
I think both. Trump is exhausting. He's meant to be exhausting. I think that's a stratagem that we're going to exhaust them. We're going to, if you're a boxing fan, and I used to be, certainly, if you're a stick and move guy, you stick, you move, and the big bludgeoning George Foreman, woof, 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 and you avoided the shots. And if you stuck and moving, you exhausted him. And like Ali did in Zaire, and by the 8th round, they're exhausted. That's what they're playing at, I suspect. But I'm also, Ted, I've been doing this for 45 years. And I had hoped that we would have reached some higher level. I mean, maybe, or at least maintain some status quo. The only advanced degree I have is from the California Republican Campaign Management College. And everything I learned there is now wrong. Nothing in politics makes any sense anymore. And okay, that's an age. Is that an age thing? I think it's very purposeful. I mean, I would never have guessed that a Donald Trump type phenomena would have happened. But it's not just Donald Trump, because he's also driven the other side insane. Let me throw this out, and I know I've used this analogy before, but I'm going to use it again. And that's my Peanut Brittle Day cartoon I used in my comic strip, Prickly City. Sometimes, Ted, I know you never do, but some of us actually push against deadline, and we're desperate for an idea, and we go, "Oh crap! Okay, here's this." For me, my Sunday Prickly City was running on National Peanut Brittle Day. And I have the characters.
How do you find out that it's National Peanut Brittle Day?
There's a website that has a calendar that tells you each day what national days are on it. So I just go to that. I mean, that's the fallback. That's the, oh crap, let's see is there anything there I can use? And there wasn't until there was. And I needed to go and get. And so I said, okay, National Peanut Brittle Day. I have the characters looking out at the panel, looking at the readers. They're smiling, big smiles, saying, it's National Peanut Brittle Day. And their teeth are rotten and cracked and broken. I mean, it's not funny. It's a stupid ass. It's a peanut brittle joke. Okay. It's a peanut brittle joke. Clearly that's it. There's no metaphor. There's no overriding theme. It's not like, thanks Obama for the peanut brittle.
You're not saying that peanut brittle represents the ennui of the modern man in our existential society?
No, I was saying it's sweet, it's crammed full of sugar, and it's hard. That was really the joke. That was it. The first comment.
Is it the day before National Dentistry Day?
They probably. The first comment on Go Comics was, "Oh, I see you're not saying anything about how MAGA is destroying the country." Like, Holy Mary, Mother of God. Yeah, but that's where we are. And so when that's the discussion, that's the only way, that's the only gist, that's the only course that a discussion of any sort can take. Well, I'm done, because I'm a never Trump Republican, which some would say I'm not a Republican anymore, which may be true. When you so I get it from them, and then I get it from the Democrats, who can't cotton any kind of criticism. Remember, Ted, there's 2 cartoonists. I'm trying to remember their names now, because we're naming names apparently, who were very, very adamant in saying that Joe Biden was addled and shouldn't be president of the United States, and certainly shouldn't be running for re-election. I'm trying to think, because they got yelled at, demeaned, demoted in many areas. I mean, it was really cruel, and it turned out that they were right. I'm trying to remember their names. It's like,
I don't remember.
It was like Rantis and Stahl.
Oh wait, there they are up on the screen.
Oh, wow, Ted, you're good. You pulled up their images, and they're moving and talking. That's so weird. But getting back to the cartooning, what happens going forward? I mean, you can say, well, the market for the cartooning is dead. That's what editors say, which they're so full of shit.
Well, they're the market.
Yeah, well, they're the retail outlet,
they're
right?
the gatekeepers, right? I mean, it's interesting. Like, my favorite mouthwash is Scope. For some reason, you can't find Scope in a lot of stores anymore. You go to like
They know what they did.
big Scope, big mouthwash. And so CVS doesn't have Scope, right? And it's like, why doesn't CVS have Scope? I don't know. But so so if Scope sales go down, maybe someone, well, people just don't like that green mouthwash anymore. No, they just can't find it because CVS won't carry it. I order it from Fresh Direct. That's how much I like Scope. But most people aren't going to go to the effort that I'm going to. So therefore, the sales are going to drop. That's what's happening for us. I mean, you put the stuff in the paper or on a website, it still drives me crazy that MSNBC.com and FoxNews.com and Salon and Slate and Axios and all these other political news websites do not have a whole bunch of staff cartoonists. I ran into a guy who was a publisher of a very, very major political site a few months ago at a party. And, he goes, well, we did think about having one cartoonist. And I was like, how many? And I go, how many writers do you have? And he kind of laughed because he knew where I was going with that, right? It's like, you don't say like, oh, we've already got a writer. Like, like you say, like you don't. And like, and honestly, in this, why would you say the same thing about cartooning? And, they didn't used to. In the 1950s, the New York Times had 4 staff editorial cartoonists. And nobody thought that was strange.
No, the Chicago Tribune had the terrible trio from Tennessee. It was 3 editorial cartoonists. Count them, 3. Now we're, I think we're laying out the groundwork. We're blaming editors, we're blaming the industry, but we're also blaming ourselves for many of us producing, and myself included, many times mediocre work.
I understand the pressure to do that because there were rewards in it.
Oh, but absolutely.
I think that those of us who didn't do it as much lasted longer because the public didn't want that.
No, well, because it's uninteresting. You can have, again, if you're trying to carp what someone like Mike Peters or Jeff McNally or Pat Oliphant were doing, you can't because you're not a genius. I'm no genius. Right. So now at some point, probably in my 30s, I realized I'm no genius.
You can only be a good Scott Stantis. You know what I mean?
Right. Precisely. So I tried to go that route, and it seemed to have worked out pretty well. Ended up at the Chicago Tribune, which was by far the biggest paper hiring a cartoonist. So I mean, I've seemed to have done okay.
For sure.
But where are we? I mean, I draw for Michael Smerkonish's newsletter. He has a Saturday show on CNN. He also has a daily show on Sirius XM. He's really done yeoman's work. And if you want to look at how to improve your brand aggressively and do it well, he's the guy you want to look at. So he hired 4 of us cartoonists to draw, and he put together a book of the cartoons we did leading up to the 2024 election. It sold out in a day and a half or 2 days. What he wanted to do, the way he established it, first of all, we didn't see any money from it, the cartoonists, but that's another issue for another day.
Buy my book.
Buy Ted's book. Help support cartoonists and the thoughtful ones, the ones who write, books. But the Smokonish book, he wanted to cover the cost of printing. That was his only objective, and he covered it within, I think it was 2 days. And the rest of the time, he sold so many books, he was able to donate $250,000 to a local charity in Philadelphia. And Ted, these books are, I could go grab it, but anyway, they're big and they're beautiful and they're wonderfully put together, and they're not cheap. They're $50.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So for him to sell it, so there was clearly an appetite for editorial cartooning. I taught a course a year and a half ago at University of Alabama, Birmingham, Discovering the Power of Comic Art. And the kids, none of them had seen a comic strip. None of them had read a newspaper, a print edition newspaper. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating. It's like literally none of them. And as the course progressed and unfolded, and they were exposed to comic strips, they were exposed to single panel gag cartoons, they were exposed to editorial cartoons. Part of the assignments was they had to produce them themselves. They fell in love with them. They said, and it was just so frustrating. It's like, where can I see these? I'm like, oh, good God. Oh crap.
Yeah.
There's clearly a market for it. There's clearly an appetite. I continue to think that they are a wonderful for consumption on on smartphones.
Of course.
Go Comics, I would say it's probably the number one site for cartoon art to go for comic strips, editorial cartoons, single panel gags. They just redesigned it and it's shittier than ever, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And one thing I've pushed for years is people who do multi-panel cartoons, if you're going to offer it through something like Go Comics, they have the opportunity to stack them. So, here, I'll do an education because most people don't know. This is a smartphone. And so people go like that when they look at it. Wouldn't it be better than when it comes up on your smartphone is literally this
and
big,
you have to squozify it. Like, what is that?
And then go through. Why not stack the panels so that they can be writ large? And you go, boom, boom, ha ha ha. Oh, that Garfield sure hates Mondays.
I don't know if you've read comic books on an iPad, but a lot of them have an interface where, regardless of the dimensions or the size of the panel, you click the panel and then it moves to the next panel and fills up the entire panel, the entire screen, and so on. That makes sense. That's how it should be.
Yeah. And they didn't do any of that. I mean, it's just really, I can't tell you how bad a job they did over at Go Comics. And they obviously stripped away all of the information that they, instead of carrying it forward to the new website. So my 22,000 followers are now gone.
Well, they also got rid of all the commenting. And look,
except for comic strips.
The interactivity is important too. People really do appreciate that.
I think, yeah, but it gets weird and it gets ugly. I mean, it just gets dumb. And so, I mean, I don't read the comments anymore just because it's the same 10 guys who are arguing with each other. It just makes no friggin' sense. But as far as the future goes, there are some cartoonists who are working very hard at establishing their own brand. They're using Substack to broaden their audience and also monetize what they're doing. I think things like that in the short term are fine, but it's never going to be in the short term a staff job like I was able to enjoy in my career. And this is exactly what it sounds like. You go to the office, you sit down at your desk, you do what you're supposed to do, and then they give you a paycheck at the end of the week. When I started at the Commercial Appeal, God, I don't know why I'm mentioning this, but I think it's hilarious. Ted, have you ever had a job where you had to stand in line for your paycheck?
I had to stand in line to cash it, but I don't think that's what you're talking about.
No, when I worked at the Commercial Appeal, there was literally a window, and every Friday, or I'm wondering if it was Friday or Thursday, I can't remember.
Oh, now. Actually, I did have a gig like that. I had a State Department gig in Turkmenistan.
You did?
I did for 6 weeks in 2000. And it was, that's a whole story. We could do a whole podcast on that because it would tell you a lot about government and Iran. I snuck off to Iran. And anyway, the way, and there was a stipend, and I had to go to the U.S. Embassy in Ashgabat and wait in line. And then they doled out, I think they gave me cash, which,
oh my gosh. Okay. That's different.
But
this was here's the newspaper industry in a nutshell, Ted. I'm working at the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, Tennessee, and we're told there's going to be a Christmas bonus. Gannett, the owner, the chain that owned the Commercial Appeal, never gave Christmas bonuses, but they said, you're getting a bonus this year. And we're just like, oh, that's awesome. Money's good. I like money. I pay my rent with money. We stand in line for our paychecks. Do you know what the Christmas bonus was? You'll never guess. So I'm not going to drag this out. It was Scripps Howard had just spent $1 gazillion to have a new logo. The logo for the company was a lighthouse. And so this is a simplified drawing of a lighthouse in a square in resin. That was the Christmas bonus. Was the new logo, the new corporate logo in a block of resin. Merry Christmas to us. I'm not kidding. Anyway, but you had to stand. It was so weird. I've never experienced that in my life. Usually they threw it in your inbox or they threw it on your desk, but that's what the job was back in the day. It was a job. It was a factory job, effectively. You went to the office, you worked, they paid you. You know, you joined the union, and you got paid, and that's how it worked out. But and I'm sorry Ted never got to experience the the dehumanizing aspects of American employment in the latter part of the 20th century, because it was awesome.
No, I know. I you know, it's the grass is always greener thing. I mean, you know, I didn't have to go to an office. You know, it's funny. My mom was always like, oh, you know, you would be more successful if you were more of a moderate centrist Democrat. You would, you know, be on staff at a paper. I think, look, I think back in the 90s when I was trying to get one of those jobs, it was clear I was never going to. And so I decided, hey, if I can't be, you know, on the inside looking out, I'll be on the outside not looking in. I'm just going to have a good time and do the kinds of cartoons that, you know, I wanted to do. I have not, you know, obviously we all pull our punches to a certain extent. Like we're not allowed to curse or we were not allowed until recently to curse in cartoons, in print and stuff. But I got away with a lot. And I did whatever I wanted, and so, you know, I mean, that's the trade-off.
Oh yeah, no, I'm truly you succeeded where
though
I'd say a large number of our compadres failed. So you definitely dodged having to deal with that, you know, trauma that I'm still dealing with today.
I would have been fired for sure. I mean, I'd be unemployed for sure by now, just like most of our colleagues.
Yeah, there's how many staff cartoonists are there? 2, 3 I can think of. Back in the heyday, back when Jeff McNally graced the cover of Newsweek magazine, which was honestly a big deal, there's about 220, 250 of us. The number seems kind of flexible, but roughly there's still not that many, but a lot. And nowadays, I think there are, I'm trying to say maybe 3 that come to mind right now. Clay Bennett in Chattanooga, Adam Ziglis in Buffalo, and Matt Davies at Newsday. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that's on staff. Oh, Michael Lukovich.
Is he still on staff at Atlanta?
Yeah.
Or is he like a contract person?
I'm under the impression he's still on staff.
Although a lot of times people have been, you can't really tell from the outside, right? Yeah.
So there it is, man. I mean, that's where we are. So going forward, I don't know that there's a forward. We're popular. People like us. I think it's an art form that applies beautifully to today's technology with smartphones. Especially, I would argue that your style, Ted, much more than my own, is applicable to viewing it on a smartphone because you have a much simpler style.
Simpler, yeah.
I crosshatch the shit out of stuff, which gets muddy and is not very pretty to look at on a smartphone.
Stop crosshatching.
I'm not sure if you've looked. I've cut back significantly. It's much more simple, much more outline, much more single line drawing. I've really simplified the drawing more than I have.
Because cross-hatching is like, it was the purpose of it, right? You tell me. Is the purpose of it, though, evolved in order to provide shading when there's no other way to provide texture? Or
I think that's part,
in a low resolution black and white newspaper.
Right. And then they came up with graphics paper. Here's something that no one listening or watching will know about. And graphics paper was chemically treated by Ohio Arts.
Yes.
And you applied, and the chemical smelled like rotten eggs, but it brought out a halftone, and that made life a lot easier. And you could do it with a brush, and you could dry brush it. So it made it look much more painterly. And that's where Jeff McNally was a master of it, as was Pat Oliphant. Mm-hmm. And now I think, like I said, going back to very simplified drawing is where we're going to go. So what happens next? I mean, as far as, dinosaurs like me, I don't see a future. But I think that what's going to happen is some kid who lives in Rochester, New York, is going to discover a Ted Rallcart book and go, holy shit, this stuff rules. Is going to copy it, or at least ape the style and create his or her own. It's going to be massively popular in Rochester. They're going to try and distribute it nationally where it's also massively popular. And then editors, being editors, are going to look at this and go, people like me buy, get cartoon person, draw me cartoon. And that will be the resurrection and the renaissance of our art form. But as things stand today, all of these gatekeepers, all of these forces lined up against us. Now, before we go, I really just want to touch on, and I didn't address it in a serious or as complete a way I'd like to, is that's the era of Trump. I have had many cartoonists say, should I use a nom de plume? Now, Ted and I, my reaction, Ted, I'm not sure what yours would be, but mine was like, no, damn it,
I don't understand the question. What do they mean? They're afraid. What are they afraid of?
Well, I think this era, it's the same thing that Senator McCloskey, is that her name, from Alaska, said that she's actually lives in fear because of the Trumpites and their language is often so violent.
Vague. Afraid of, okay. When someone tells me they're afraid, what are you afraid of? What do you think specifically is going to happen? So the senator thinks that Lisa Murkowski, does she really think someone's going to, I don't know, shoot her? Is she worried about being primaried out? What is she worried about? If she's worried about being primaried out, well, I hope she's got a retirement plan, and I hope she did a bunch of insider trading like all senators do.
Yeah, apparently that's a thing.
And then retire, and she's old as shit. Retire. I mean, go become a college president at the University of Nome or whatever. Just like, I don't know. But is she genuinely afraid of being killed? Like, what are these people you're talking to? What are they so afraid of?
I think that's one of the things they're afraid of, but they're also, I mean, as Trump has shown, they will go after you and they can make your life pretty miserable. And I think they're afraid of that.
I know what it's like to have the system go after me. Fuck them.
Yeah. Well, that's, you showed that you fight back, and that's what people aren't met with a lot of fight, and they're not full of a lot of fight. And that's why, I think Ted and I both have touched on our exhaustion with the current system and how it seems to be going very much in an opposite direction that Ted or I would have preferred. So that's where we are right now in terms of the state of cartooning. And I think I don't know.
I'm tired of these cowards. I mean, honestly, it's like no one's coming to kill them. It's like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Are you afraid to travel? Let me put it that way. I am. I'm afraid that when I come back into the United States,
I'm not personally afraid of like random Republicans or Trump supporters, but I am worried about like border and customs enforcement or ICE. I mean, those people are fucking crazy. And the way I look at it is, it's not just about what they do in a linear way. It's the fact that they're reckless even for themselves. I mean, follow me through this. Okay, so if 4 guys come up to me in the streets of Manhattan, they're not wearing badges, no uniforms. They have masks on, hats, hoodies, and they surround me and they try to push me into an unmarked car, which is how they gather like grad students and people like that who had the temerity to write a letter to the editor of the school paper saying that maybe Israel should stop killing so many Palestinians. It's like those people. So I don't know who they are. And, one of these days they're going to do this to someone who's going to avail themselves of their Second Amendment rights to self-defense. And that shows how stupid they are, because when that happens, that person's not guilty of any crime. And that person is going to get off the hook. And everyone on the jury, from lefties like me to right-wing gun owners, are going to say, yeah, that person deserves to walk. So, but that shows, like, when people are so stupid and that they're even willing to disregard their own personal safety, I'm scared of them. And I am scared of them. I'm worried about traveling for sure, because I think these people they're dumb as rocks.
They are.
I mean, look at what happened the other day. Border and Customs Enforcement boarded an Amtrak train on the border between North Dakota and Montana, and they went car by car like German SS officers, demanding proof of citizenship from everyone on board. Now, I don't know about you. I don't carry proof of citizenship. Well, actually, no. I do. I have a U.S. passport card. But
me too.
But the point is that, like, most people don't. And this is the United States. We don't have an ID law. You're not required to carry ID with you when you go out in the street or when you take the train somewhere. Okay. So, but what most Americans don't know is that anywhere within a 100-mile buffer zone away from an international border, you can be searched by Borders and Customs Enforcement. They can and do search trains. They set up roadblocks on interstate highways. You might think, well, this is only like in a few places. No, 70% or so of the entire US population lives within 100 miles of an international border, the border with Mexico, Canada, or the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean. So most people live near those places. And so you're subject to this kind of thing. It's scary. And, they went through with long guns, all dressed up in Kevlar, masked, wearing hats and hoodies, terrorizing a bunch of old people who are, those trains are just sightseeing trains for the elderly. They're not a form of transportation. Nobody's going to Montana by train who's in a hurry to get there. So, like, what's the purpose here? Like, it's to terrorize the public. So
right.
Yeah, I'm afraid because I'm supposed to be afraid, but I'm not afraid of like my fellows. I'm not afraid of my fellow citizens who are conservative. I'm afraid of the government, which frankly, everyone should be afraid of, including conservatives.
Well, yeah, build a career on it. So let's leave it at that. Can I promote a few things? Because I just want to say, I'm wearing a cap here. If you notice, it's for the Red Mountain Iron Works.
Nice.
And that is my son's company. He does ornamental iron work. So if you want to check it out, it's
good
really,
too.
It's cool, isn't it? I like it.
I like the trim. The white trim in the front is nice. Yeah.
Brings out the black and white in my eyes. I think it's lovely. But also my favorite team, the Birmingham Bulls, are they're in a like not sudden death, but this is their best of 3 series. They're going to game 3 today at 2:00. So send out your good luck sports
what is the
mojo.
Bull connection with Birmingham? Were there ever cows or steers there?
I'm sure there have been. I don't know. I just think it's a cool logo, though. I mean, I really love this logo. It's one of my favorites.
They're just going for alliteration.
Yes.
Inexplicably, Suffolk County, New York, which is eastern Long Island, where the Hamptons and other places are, the logo is a steer with a big longhorn. And apparently there was a history of cowification out there. It's very strange.
Oh, that's really weird. So those are the 2 things I need to mention now. Ted, show your book again, please.
Oh, sure. So the new book, it comes out May 1st, International Workers' Day. It's called What's Left, and never mind the Democrats. Here's what's left. So it's basically the idea is we're going to define, or we need to define, and my book tries to do it, but we on the left need to define what we stand for on all the most important issues and how we would run things if we were in charge of the country. And that's where we have to start. We are organized around a set of principles and ideas. Then we create an organization, a party, and so on. But you don't start with the party and then try to figure out your principles later. You start with the principles, then you build, you organize around those principles, and then you can maybe create a third party or maybe try to have a revolutionary army that takes over the government, whatever you want to do. But the point is, you got to start with the idea. So that's what this is.
Okay. So where can we see all things Ted Rollian?
Well, go to Go
We're about to see that.
Ignore everything we said about Go Comics before. GoComics.com/Ted Rall and /Scott Stantis. You can go to rall.com, RALL.com. Go to whowhatwhy.org on Saturdays. Oh, wait, today's Saturday. So the new cartoon should be up. And what about you, Scott?
Same thing. Go to there. Go to Chicago Tribune. Just, you'll see it. Go to smirkonish.com and all of your Scott Stantis needs will be met.
Oh, well, that's very important. All right, we're gonna go ahead and close it out. Scott, you know what to do. Here we go. Bye.
It's DMZ America. The podcast. With Ted. DMZ America. The podcast.